This paper is a work in progress towards a chapter in my doctoral thesis that focuses on Greek film consumption practices, specifically those of first-generation Greek-Australian migrants and their Australian-born children, the second generation, in a rural, post-war South Australian setting. Inspired enormously by the Italian Cinema Audiences project, this paper will also include excerpts of video interviews conducted with surviving audience members to show the ways in which Greek film was a significant platform for the navigation of diasporic identity. It does this by using three conceptual themes that emerged after qualitative data analysis. They are reflection, regeneration, and resistance. On the last Sunday of every month, Greek film nights were held at the Civic Cinema in Whyalla. It was the highlight of this local Greek community's month, as it was a chance to gather, to socialise, and be treated to an evening of entertainment that included a double bill of Greek films. Here, first-generation Evangelia offers some of her thoughts on these films.
Ωραίο που το στέλνετε για να κάνουν τους ανθρώπους να αισθάνονται πιο ζεστοί και να θυμούνται αυτά που αφήσανε πίσω τους. Σε έφερνε σε συνάντηση με τους δικούς τους, με την πατρίδα και με τα έθιμά τους. Γιατί αν δεν υπήρχαν και αυτά τότε, δεν είχαμε και τίποτε πιο καλό. Να μην έχεις κάτι επικοινωνία, να βλέπεις κάτι δικό σου. Γιατί αυτά που έρχονταν εδώ, οι ταινίες ήταν ένα κομμάτι από τη ζωή του κάθε Έλληνα που έφυγε από εκεί.
Τι εννοείται, ήταν ένα κομμάτι...
Ήταν ένα κομμάτι που σου έδειχνε τη ζωή σου και σε έφερνε πιο κοντά στους ανθρώπους που άφησες. Γιατί άκουγες την ελληνική γλώσσα, άκουγες τα αστεία, άκουγες όλα αυτές τις κωμωδίες που σε έκαναν να γελάς. Ήταν ωραία.
For Evangelia, the films were not just a reflection of herself, her language and her culture, but also a reflection of her old life, an imagined life that could have been had she stayed in Greece. A life that she and many other migrants did not necessarily want to leave behind, but had to for economic reasons. And while Australia promised opportunity, English language acquisition, isolation and assimilation proved very challenging for this first generation to overcome. Essentially, a grieving process had to take place, not just of former country of residence and attachment, but of a former identity as well. Films then facilitated a platform upon which a communal and collective grief could occur. In much the same way as Annette Kuhn refers to, and I quote, the physical struggle of holding on and letting go that characterizes the activity of mourning, end quote. This act of looking back while making sense of the present is less about being in a passive state of nostalgia and more about actively doing the nostalgising. Nostalgising, a verb in Greek that appears in neither Cambridge nor Oxford English dictionaries, was a necessary process, together with grief, that prompted change. For instance, nostalgising about an old life can help to answer important questions around identity, such as, who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? And how am I going to get there? Talitha Faraz calls this activated nostalgia in her fascinating study of Brazilian audiences transforming activism into a creative process. The creative process here being the navigation of necessary changes and adaptations to a diasporic identity. In other words, the reflection of and connection to self and to old life on screen alongside the associated struggles of holding on and letting go of this, happen at the same time as activating and adapting to a new life. Just as fundamental as films were for this first generation's looking back, so too were they equally as important in offering opportunities that cultivated a shift to looking forwards. First generation Anna explains why.
Αρχή που για λίγο θα ξεχνούσαμε τις στενοχώριες μας, τις πίκρες μας, την απελπισία, αυτό μας έδινε και δύναμη, γι' αυτό κοιτούσαμε και προσεχώς τι θα έρθει, τι ταινίες θα έχουμε, να κάνουμε κουράγιο, να είμαστε έτοιμοι για να ξαναπάμε.
Film in this instance nurtures a type of regeneration or renewal of identity, where instead of looking back, a forwards-looking mentality begins to emerge. These pockets of respite that Anna describes were a welcome distraction during a time of extreme uncertainty and fueled anticipation for wanting more of the same thing. This anticipation was further heightened by the screening of trailers at the end of each film night, advertising the films that would be coming next month. The pockets of respite these films brought had a profound effect in their ability to regenerate their audience's strength, boost their morale, and encourage a shifted focus towards the next month's double bill. But the unexpected implication of these monthly incremental forwards movements was that they also extended to looking to the future more broadly with anticipation and confidence, in spite of extreme uncertainties. This confidence and hope in the future is replicated in much the same way through psychologist Charles Snyder's theory of hope, and fosters a regeneration that was a necessary step in the navigation and negotiation of this first generation's diasporic identity. Hope also came in the form of their children, the second generation, some of whom were also taken to the film nights. But by this point, Greece was progressing both economically and socially, and these changes were also reflected in Greek cinema. Second generation Jerry talks us through about his thoughts on this.
When I was watching the more modern movies, which were very liberal in a lot of things, I was wondering, this is not the traditions and the ethics that my parents are bringing me up on, you know.
Yeah.
This is not the Greece this is not this is not the Greece they're telling me it is, you know.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing here and hearing here, you know.
Being born in Australia, Jerry's only real connection to Greece was through his parents and the Greece that they remembered. Yet, Greek films, by the time Jerry was old enough to remember them, were offering an alternative version of Greece to the one his parents had left behind and to the traditions that they had held on to. These modern films reflected the progressive attitudes going on in Greece and indeed the rest of the world at the time. Attitudes that were not harmonious with the traditions he was being raised with at home, but were familiar to him outside the family home because of the Australian society he was also growing up in. This identity double life, as Rangan Chatterjee refers to it, this incongruous nature of occupying different identities between home and the outside world, is not an unfamiliar experience among the second generation. As Margherita Sprio's work on intergenerational Italian-British audiences also reveals. What is fascinating about this idea of separate worlds is Greek film's ability to combine the two on screen, so that Greekness and progressiveness are no longer separate entities, but have indeed combined into one. And this combination also gives Jerry permission to do the same thing, to be both at once, rather than two distinctive identities that are separated by a front door. And it is through this invitation that film also allows Jerry to navigate the diasporic identity he too occupies, and to begin carving out his own connection to Greece, while at the same time resisting his parents' connection to it. This practice of resistance between the first and second generations' connection to place is also echoed brilliantly in Margherita Sprio's exploration of Italian British migrants and their memories of post-war Italian film. Jerry talks more here on how Greek films enabled him to further shape his diasporic identity.
I tried to feel something. I tried to feel something which, not being born in Greece, I hadn't felt. Would they, through their acting, through what they acted and what they said, could I feel something of what was Greece, or the Greek psyche?
Did it work?
Well, it was different than the Australian or the Australian English or the American psyche. Yes, it was different.
What was different?
It felt different inside. It felt different. It felt different. Yes, and I can't explain it in words. It just felt so different. It didn't feel. I didn't feel as much of a stranger. I felt more like I was sort of a part of it. More, yeah. I was a part of it. That psyche.
The Greek psyche.
The Greek psyche. Yeah.
And do you think your friends also felt the same?
I think they did. Although they didn't say it. I think they did too. Because we were young, we back then, that in my era, men bottled things up. They didn't. It wasn't manly to come out and say things like this. You bottled it up and you just took it, and you were a man. You were a foreigner. You felt you were a stranger. You swallowed it and you just marched on.
It is fascinating to note the paradox in this clip between Jerry's foreignness within an Australian context and the foreignness he feels simultaneously towards the Greek psyche he wants to learn so much about. It is equally as fascinating to observe his difficulty in articulating what felt so different about watching Greek films. Similar difficulties in this articulation of pleasure are also prominent in Ian Eng's wonderful case study of audiences watching the 1980s TV show Dallas. And just as Eng's audiences identified with some of the themes in the show, so too does Jerry feel he can identify with what was on screen. He says he felt a part of it, which perhaps means that for Jerry and others occupying the diasporic space of second generation Greek Australian, perhaps pleasure manifests itself through a sense of belonging. But Jerry could not have known this at the time, for it is only through retrospection, Carlos Lozano writes, that Jerry is in a position to make meaningful connections between his feelings of estrangement, how these feelings were silenced because of gendered constructions of heteronormative masculinity, and the role that Greek film played in allowing him to feel less of a stranger. To sum up, Greek films played a significant role for both first and second generation Greek Australians with regards to the navigation of their diasporic identities. And the meanings audiences have attached to these films after more than 50 years bears testament to this. Perhaps in some ways, then, Greek film might also be thought of as a companion throughout moments of reflection, regeneration, and resistance, as well as a piece not just of every Greek person's life who left there, as Evangelia tells us, but also of those among the second generation with living memory of having seen them. Thank you very much for listening.